Have you ever wondered how the story of Shrek the Third would have changed if, instead of Artie, Shrek himself had taken the throne of Far, Far Away? In this video, we're diving into that alternate universe and breaking down how this one choice could have flipped the plot, shaken up the characters' reactions, and completely altered the fate of the kingdom under such a different kind of leadership. Right from the start of the movie, it's crystal clear that Shrek wants nothing to do with being king. For him, ruling a kingdom is a total nightmare, something that goes against everything he stands for. When King Harold falls ill, Shrek and Fiona are forced to step in and take on royal duties, meetings, ceremonies, and all the responsibilities that used to belong to the king and queen. With Harold out of the picture, the couple is thrown into the thick of palace life. And it doesn't take long to see that Shrek just doesn't fit in. Raised in a secluded swamp, he's never been part of the whole royal etiquette thing or the social codes of nobility. The result? Some pretty cringy and downright disastrous moments. He sinks a boat by chucking a bottle without thinking, accidentally stabs someone with a sword, and nearly scratches his butt in public, causing massive embarrassment. These moments only make it more obvious to Shrek that he's not cut out to be king. That's exactly why he sets off to find a legitimate heir, eventually landing on Artie as the perfect solution to avoid a fate he never wanted in the first place. Deep down, Shrek knows that as an ogre, he'd never really fit the mold of what that world expects from a king. Still, if you really think about it, it's not totally impossible to imagine Shrek being a decent king, if he managed to keep his temper in check and dial things down a bit. But let's be honest, that's never been his strong suit. Shrek's always had a short fuse, and that would be a major problem with that much power in his hands. One moment of anger could lead to a reckless decision, something with serious, maybe even irreversible consequences. A small crisis could spiral into full-on disaster. To avoid that kind of mess, he'd have to constantly hold himself back. And for someone like Shrek, that would be exhausting. The pressure of constantly suppressing who he really is would make him a reluctant ruler, someone doing the job out of duty, not passion. You'd probably see him sulking through the castle halls, dodging meetings and bailing on ceremonies whenever he could. And yet, his realness would still shine through. Unlike a lot of leaders, he wouldn't pretend to be something he's not. That kind of honesty, even if it came wrapped in grumpiness, might actually win over some of the people. After all, Shrek would rule without a mask, showing exactly who he is. And for a lot of folks, that kind of raw honesty is a rare thing to find in someone with power. The court of Far, Far Away would go through a complete transformation with Shrek on the throne. The old-school customs built on luxury and formality would slowly fade away. In their place, new traditions would rise, shaped by the ogre's simple and not at all polished lifestyle. Elegant meals would turn into over-the-top feasts, filled with heavy rustic dishes that looked more like something straight out of the swamp than a royal banquet. Official balls and fancy galas? They'd be swapped for laid-back gatherings open to regular folks, where fun mattered more than etiquette. Even the castle's appearance would shift. Those perfect gardens and shiny halls would give way to more practical spaces, tailored to Shrek's tastes. This shake-up of traditions would definitely ruffle some feathers in the noble circles. The aristocrats would feel out of place, like they didn't belong anymore. On the flip side, the everyday people would finally see the castle as something closer to home, a space they could relate to. But Shrek's biggest challenge as king? Diplomacy. That's where things would get messy. He's never been great with speeches, protocols, or delicate negotiations. When dealing with representatives from other kingdoms, he'd be too blunt, too impatient, and often downright rude, without even realizing it. In this kind of setup, Donkey would be crucial. Even without any political chops, his non-stop chatter would act like a buffer, diffusing tension, distracting from awkward moments, and keeping Shrek's lack of diplomacy from blowing things up. Still, Far, Far Away's image abroad would definitely change. The kingdom would stop being seen as a symbol of sophistication and strategy, and instead become known as this unpredictable monarchy ruled by a guy who couldn't care less about traditional decorum. That would spark a lot of distrust, but also a bit of respect. Some would see Shrek as a refreshingly real leader who doesn't bend to convention. Without Arthur on the throne, a young guy brimming with diplomatic promise, Shrek's rise could look like an open invitation for villains to test the waters. Many wouldn't accept the legitimacy of an ogre ruling the land, and that would leave the door wide open for organized uprisings. But here's the thing, Shrek wouldn't be some backroom king. He'd face threats head-on with brute strength and raw courage, stepping into the role of a warrior king. That tough stance would bring order through force. Enemies would quickly learn that messing with Shrek wasn't a smart move. The downside? The kingdom would live in a constant state of alert, with little hope for lasting peace, the kind Arthur might have brought through diplomacy and a more hopeful vision. In this version of the story, Fiona would be the true MVP. While Shrek grumbled and stormed his way through royal duties, she'd be the one actually keeping things running. With her experience experience as a princess and her strong sense of responsibility, Fiona would become the real leader behind the scenes, balancing out her husband's flaws with wisdom and long-term thinking. Shrek and Fiona, ruling side by side, would make for a completely unconventional royal duo, but one that's surprisingly complementary. Their kids would grow up in a world totally different from the one Shrek knew as a child. They'd have the freedom of the swamp as part of their everyday life, but also be given a royal education, complete with lessons in etiquette, history, and politics. This would create an interesting contrast. On one hand, little ogres learning how to carry themselves like nobles. On the other, Shrek's constant influence, encouraging them not to get too caught up in all that formality. That kind of dual upbringing would shape a whole new generation of potential heirs, ones capable of blending the best of both worlds. Unlike Shrek, they might be able to embrace the role of royalty more naturally, but without ever letting go of the authenticity they inherited from their dad. And that could pave the way for future stories, where the monarchy is less stiff and way more in tune with the people. But the biggest impact of Shrek's reign wouldn't be the policies or the royal family dynamics. It'd be the deep transformation of Far, Far Away itself. The kingdom would stop being a symbol of luxury and tradition, and turn into something more grounded, more accessible. The gap between the people and the crown would shrink dramatically. Shrek wouldn't care about keeping up appearances or maintaining expensive traditions just to impress other kingdoms. He'd likely put his energy into practical improvements, healthcare, housing, infrastructure, focusing on actually improving people's lives instead of throwing lavish parties or building shiny monuments. Sure, Far, Far Away might lose some of its fairy tale sparkle, but in return it'd become a kingdom that truly mattered to those who lived there. A place that's less idealized but more fair, more real, and totally unlike any other land in the storybook world. The biggest consequence of Shrek's reign, however, would be the deep transformation of Far, Far Away. The kingdom would no longer be a symbol of luxury and tradition, but something more grounded and accessible. The gap between the people and the crown would shrink drastically. Shrek wouldn't care about keeping up appearances or preserving expensive traditions just to impress other kingdoms. He'd likely invest in real improvements, healthcare, housing, infrastructure, focusing on the people's quality of life instead of throwing grand parties or building decorative monuments. Sure, Far, Far Away would lose some of its fairy tale shine, but in return it would become a kingdom with real value for the people who live there. A place less idealized but more fair, more authentic, and completely unlike any other in the storybook world. Now let's imagine what Shrek Forever After would have looked like if the ogre were already king when he met Rumpelstiltskin. In the original movie, Shrek is frustrated with domestic life and misses the freedom of his swamp days. But as a king, that frustration would be even greater. He wouldn't just be tired of family life, he'd be buried under royal duties, courtly pressure, and the diplomacy he's always hated. So when Rumpel comes along with that contract, the temptation would hit even harder. It wouldn't just be a chance to go back to being a regular, anonymous ogre. It'd be a way out of a crown he never wanted. In the film, the contract erases the day Shrek was born. But in this alternate scenario, the consequences would be even heavier. It would also erase his entire reign as king. The kingdom would have developed without his leadership, leaving Rumpel the perfect opportunity to seize power, exploiting the vacuum left by the absence of a legitimate heir. Far, Far Away would become the complete opposite of what we saw before. No connection with the people, no cultural shifts, and a manipulative, bureaucratic government in charge. The nobility, who once grumbled about Shrek, would now be under an even stricter regime. And the people? Silenced completely. Fiona, in this timeline, would have never become queen. She would have escaped the tower on her own, living in isolation, distrustful, and without the experience of building a family. When the two finally reunite, it would feel distant and unfamiliar. Shrek would be meeting a version of Fiona who was never his partner on the throne, a complete stranger. Their kids would never exist. But in this case, the pain wouldn't just be emotional. They would have been the rightful heirs to a throne that, without Shrek, never came to be. Their absence would represent the loss of an entire future. Once he realizes the mistake, Shrek wouldn't just be fighting to get his family back. He'd be fighting to restore a kingdom that fell apart without him. His redemption arc would carry political weight. The fate of Far, Far Away would hang in the balance. In the end, when he breaks the contract, Shrek wouldn't just win back Fiona and the kids. He'd take back the throne as well. But this time with a new awareness, that even if he never wanted it, his role as king matters. For the first time, he'd accept the title not as a burden, but as part of who he is. So go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so you don't miss any of our new content. We're always bringing you fresh takes, fun facts, and theories that break away from the obvious when it comes to movies and series. And hey, drop a comment. Do you think Shrek would have made a good king, or would it all have ended in disaster?